Good evening, friends. Welcome to Empty Cloud Monastery for monk chat. This evening we're having two venerables and a third venerable. Three venerables. I was trying to find the female form and male form, but then I realized they're all gender neutral by default, the venerables. So it's actually three venerables. All right. Welcome to Geeta, Jens, Melinda, Ryan, Ned, Liz, Eleanor, Robin, Elaine, Blazing Asian. That's a cool nickname. And David. Welcome, friends. So for those of you who are new, who from what I see, not many are new, but I think a few names are not familiar. During monk chat, you're welcome to ask any questions you'd like. And the three of us here this evening will do our best to try our best to answer them. So you can also request one particular monk to answer your question this evening. So if you want Bhante Sumano here to my left to answer, you can just put Bhante Sumano, Ayasoma, and you can put Ayasoma or Bhante Sudaso. You can put Bhante Sudaso. But if you put Bhante Sudaso too many times, then we might distribute them. Or if you put Venerable Sumano too many times, we might distribute it. Or if you put Ayasoma too many times, definitely we'll distribute it, because I am going to be the moderator this evening. And hello, Mary. Our neighbor Mary is also online. Good to see you. All right. So there are no questions yet on the live chat, so maybe we'll end it. We'll have an early night tonight. It's great.
Hello and goodbye.
Yes. So the subject tonight is emptiness.
Okay, still no questions.
Great.
So I guess that's it for monk chat.
You can also ask Ajahn Kat for some questions. Hello, Stan. Say hello. Hello, hello, hello. All right. Here Ned is asking. Oh, all right. We got a few questions.
Oh, so easy.
All right. So Ned is asking, dear venerables, is this mind also anicca, dukkha, anatta? Which one would like to respond?
Well, my answer is very short. So.
All right. So Bhante Sumano?
Yes.
Bhante Sudaso?
Yes.
Ayasoma, myself? Yes.
That was easy.
Great. No disagreement. Ajahn Kat? Yes. And Secret Spy Records is asking, did Buddhas before Gautama Buddha express the Dhamma differently than Gautama? Oh, this is a great question for Bhante Sudaso.
So the general principles were exactly the same. So all Buddhas teach the same basic principles. They teach the same fundamental concepts of Dhamma. But the exact ways that they teach will vary from Buddha to Buddha, depending upon the personality traits of that Buddha, depending upon the life experiences they had before attaining awakening, depending on the cultural conditions that they're in, depending upon the circumstances that they encounter, that will all affect the exact way that they present the Dhamma. So a simple example of this is that Gautama Buddha was raised in a family of warriors, a family of warrior aristocrats. So he used a lot of military similes and metaphors in explaining the Dhamma. But not all Buddhas are born into warrior families. So not all Buddhas are going to use military analogies when explaining things. Also, the Buddha was born in, Gautama Buddha was born in ancient India. So a lot of what he said was framed in the words and concepts that were familiar to people at that place and time. So that also affects things. And also the Buddha was teaching to people. So he said what the people he was speaking to needed to hear. So all of that affects to some degree the details, the specific methods used, but the underlying principles are always the same. So every single Buddha teaches the Four Noble Truths. They might not call it exactly that, but they teach the same concepts. Every single Buddha teaches the Noble Eightfold Path. They might formulate it differently, they might phrase it differently, but it's the same ideas. Every Buddha teaches karma and rebirth. Every Buddha teaches anicca, dukkha, anatta. These are universal principles of Dhamma, which every Buddha teaches. But they might explain it in different ways, and they might list things in different ways. Okay.
Great. Thank you, Bhante. And Ryan is asking, I'm starting a new relationship for the first time in 15 years. How do I balance this against the need to cultivate nibbida and samvega? Or are they incompatible? Bhante Sumana?
I knew you were going to pass it. Well, first I would say that they're not incompatible. So I'll approach your question from the end. They're not incompatible if you cultivate a relationship that is compatible with nibbida and samvega. So Thich Nhat Hanh, who's a Buddhist monk in Vietnamese tradition, talks a lot about relationships and how one who practices the Dhamma can cultivate wholesome relationships that really actually encourage you on the path. And one of the quotes that he mentions is, true love is like the sun, shining with its own light and offering that light to everyone. So when I first read that, it really made an impression on my mind, because when we start a relationship or whatever sort of romantic interaction with somebody, there tends to be this sort of turning inwards, turning towards that other person, where that person becomes the center of your life and you theirs. And it can become very unhealthy, toxic even, where in order for you to be happy, the other person needs to do everything that you want them to do, and vice versa. And it becomes this sort of codependent, really harmful, actually, way of interacting, where you start to form your well-being, your happiness around this other person and solely this other person. But when you do that, just like clinging to anything else, you suffer. But it is possible to create a loving relationship where that's not the case, where you offer each other freedom, whether it's freedom to change, freedom to do different things, freedom to whatever it is. It's a relationship that comes with no strings attached. Not in the sense of, no commitment, but an agreement that both of you make to not imprison the other person, actually. So there are Dharma practitioners who are in relationships, obviously. And the best ones that I've seen anyway really take to heart, actually, the teachings on impermanence, on suffering, the unsatisfactory nature of reality, and not self. And they take it to heart because they recognize that the person in front of them, one, is not going to be the same person, not just 15 years from now, but even tomorrow. So when, your partner who for 10 years loved like Meat Lover's Pizza decides to be vegan, it's not surprising. It's like, oh yeah, actually everything's impermanent. When you find actually that the sparks that were there in the beginning just aren't there anymore, it's not shocking, it's not jarring. And so the people who sort of understand this, when they're in a relationship, it's almost like smoother. It's a sympathetic sort of relationship where even if you have to go your separate ways, it's like, oh yeah, I can send you off with well wishes. So starting a relationship doesn't mean that you're going to be trapped in samsara for the rest of your life. If you practice in such a way that you can actually use the relationship to cultivate wholesome qualities, loving kindness, compassion, letting go, not always just thinking about yourself, but also thinking about others and what will truly make them happy, even if that doesn't involve you. So advice for starting a new relationship is don't make the same mistakes you've made in the past. But you can still be in that relationship and recognize that ultimately the relationship won't make you happy. For that, you'll have to practice the Dhamma.
Great. Thank you, Bante. And Eleanor is asking, why do we have a need to interact with one another? Should we let go of this? Why do we feel lonely sometimes? Is it good to seek human connections, or should we let that go? Is it my turn?
Yes.
You're moderating this one, so you decide.
Do you want to answer this, Bante?
Oh, it's up to you. You're the moderator. You choose.
I'll pass it on to Bante Sudaso.
So apparently she doesn't want to answer this one. So first off, your first question is an invalid question because it's based on a false premise. Because you have the premise that we need to interact with each other, but we don't. That's a false belief. We have no need to interact with one another. We can be perfectly happy by ourselves. However, we have the delusion that we need to interact with each other. We have craving to interact with each other, and that makes us miserable. So should we let go of that delusional craving? Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's just making us unhappy. Why would we make ourselves unhappy? Why do we feel lonely sometimes? Because we're filled with craving. We're filled with craving to interact with others, and we have the delusion that interacting with others will make us happy. That's why we feel lonely. Craving and delusion. Is it good to seek human connections? Depends on the kind of human connection you're seeking, actually. So in Buddhism, we're encouraged to develop what we call kalyana mitta, which means good spiritual friends. So we're encouraged to seek out other people who are committed to spiritual practice, who are committed to Buddha's practice in particular. Other people who are sincerely committed towards developing the path to awakening, who are sincerely committed to practicing wholesome speech and actions. Other people who are committed to purifying their minds. So those sorts of connections benefit us because they help us practice well. They help us on the path. But in the Kagavasana Sutta, the Buddha says that if you can't find a good spiritual companion who will support you, then it's better to be alone. It's better to be alone than to be with people who will drag you down. It's better to be alone than to be with people who will encourage you to do unwholesome things. It's better to be alone than to be with unspiritual people who might encourage you to do harmful things, who might draw you away from the path of Buddhist practice. So human connection is not an inherently good thing. Human connection can be good if it supports our cultivation of wholesome qualities, supports our cultivation of morality, concentration, and wisdom. Or human connection can be bad if it inhibits morality, concentration, and wisdom. So we need to apply this judgment. Again, it's better to be alone than to be with people who will drag you down, who will pull you down the dark path, the wrong path, the path that leads away from awakening. Okay.
Thank you, Bante. And Robin is asking, I'm interested in the arguments against the scientific materialist worldview, but I don't feel able to fully abandon it right now. Is there a way to move forward with practice despite this? it sounds to me that you're already actually moving forward with it, because you are cultivating interest for different views. And you're also quite aware that you have a view to begin with. So that is actually practicing the Dharma, in my opinion. It's when we start understanding the conditions, that the conditioning of the mind, and we start understanding that there are other views possible, that not necessarily we need to just take on just because they're cute or they're whatever, funny or nice, or they sound great or whatever, but just opening up the mind with curiosity and interest, and understanding, first and foremost, why we hold our particular views, and two, understanding, taking what is presented to us by the Buddhist teachings in particular. Of course, I am biased because I find great benefit from them, but being open to them. So the majority of people in this time and age in Western countries hold scientific materialist views. So why is that? It's not that, we come out of the press that way. It's just that we kind of have a sort of shared history, shared kind of commonality, shared air that we breathe, in to one degree or another. But there's also, like, we tend to make also these generalizations. Now I said the Western world, but in reality, being Italian, for example, in the United States, I realized that I'm even less scientific materialist than some people in certain respects, and a lot more scientific materialist than others in other respects. For example, people in this country grow up, I realized, more religious generally than the average Italian. So we were talking about how most of my life in Italy, I never saw even someone doing a prayer before the meal. And apparently it's extremely common in this country. Bhante Sudaza was raised that way, for example. He could not have any type of meal without praying beforehand. And our resident Antoinette was also sharing that it was extremely common. Now, Bhante Sumana, I think he had a bit of a more similar upbringing to mine. So the religion that I was raised in was scientific materialism. And so what we would say before eating was buon appetito. So have a good appetite. We always had a good appetite. We always followed what we preached and had a good appetite. But the thing is, then the form of Christianity that was permeating Italy was radically different than the Christianity that permeated this country. So then my cultural conditioning is slightly different. So there are certain things that, even though I thought they were part of the realm of what we define as secular, they were actually secular but influenced by Catholicism, as opposed to things that are in the realm of secular here in the United States are normally influenced largely by Protestantism, by different forms of Protestantism. So once you start breaking down all these processes, you start understanding that actually all the things that you think are your beliefs or your worldviews or, what you think is true is actually the product of causes and conditions. And in that way, by fully understanding that experientially, you're more flexible to let go what is not beneficial and to take on things that are more beneficial. But you have to not, at least what I advise is not to approach this through replacing one belief with another, but rather using all these concepts as working hypotheses. So not going, okay, that's it. From now, I just believe in karma and rebirth, which are normally the kind of hot topics that the average Westerner usually has an issue with, right? But instead, approaching it with, how about I take this as a working hypothesis for a year or somewhere along that, perhaps 6 months. But a year, it's actually very good amount of time to really understand how your mind reacts by thinking that actually every action you make through body, speech, and mind has a consequence. How do you relate to your actions? And also, how do you observe other people's actions and the consequences from their actions? So you start observing more carefully yourself and others, which, by the way, there's not that much difference to begin with. And also rebirth. Like really understanding what rebirth means, digging deeply, like listening to a lot of different Dhamma talks, but with a flexible mind, taking whatever you hear with as a working hypothesis once again. And if you really don't understand it, just put it on the shelf for the time being and then come back to it later. But if you just go, well, that's it. I'm not interested in karma and rebirth. I'm only interested in this sort of part of the path. I mean, that's fine too, of course. It's better than no path at all. But I feel like you would be missing out on a lot of the goodness, the preciousness, the wholesomeness of the Dhamma. And also of the process that sort of investigating your beliefs, your ideas, sort of propels you towards that. So those are my three cents. I don't remember how many cents in this country. 2. There are only 2, but I give you 3. 3 is the magic number. So the next question is from Eleanor. Do you have a favorite meditation type? Which resources would you recommend for a beginner to improve his practice? It's difficult to figure out how much social interaction one needs. How should we? Oh, that's another question. Sorry. So do you have a favorite meditation type, and which resources would you recommend for a beginner to improve their practice? Well, Bhante Suman?
Favorites. Kind of like the suttas, I like a lot of different kinds of meditation. One, though, that's pretty straightforward and also usually pretty simple for beginners is metta meditation. So meditation on loving kindness or goodwill. So that's also usually one that is recommended for beginners to sort of practice. It's very easy to get into and sort of difficult to mess up. As far as how to improve your practice, just by practicing, actually. I think the biggest thing that trips up a lot of meditators is in the beginning, there can be this rush of enthusiasm for meditation and the practice. And so they're like, oh, I'll meditate for an hour every day, twice a day. And it probably lasts for a day or 2. So I'd say start small, actually. And really look at the conditions before you meditate. So what the mind is like and what your environment is like before you sit down to meditate. Then do your meditation for 10 minutes, 15 minutes. And then afterwards, take a moment or 2 to just assess how it went, what you did well, what maybe you could change next time. And then as you do this over the course of a couple of days, weeks, months, years, etc., you start to get really responsive with your practice. And so then when you learn more methods or meditate for longer, it's easier to figure out, one, which method will work really well, and then also what sort of affects your meditation, whether it's the mind was anxious or you ate too much or you didn't sleep that much at night. These things stop being mystery because you have this habit of sort of assessing what supports your meditation practice and also what hinders it.
Great, thank you, Bhante. And Eleanor is asking, it's difficult to figure out how much social interaction one needs. How should we stay in the middle path in terms of social interaction? I think that actually Bhante had answered already in terms of spiritual friends. That's what I would say. Normally, if you find other friends who are interested in the Dharma, then you kind of balance yourself out because that is the sort of common goal And that will also mean that part of your social interaction will also be spent in silence. This afternoon, for example, here at the monastery, we spent the time together was all in silence because we practiced meditation together. So you can say that there was social interaction, but it was a wholesome interaction. So this is what you want to sort of pursue. Look at people, ideally, actually, who are advanced in the path, ahead of you in the path. That's the word that I was trying to find. Ahead of you. You don't necessarily have to find an enlightened being, so it will be very difficult to find. Good luck with that. But anyone really who is a Dharma practitioner and is ahead in front of you, and then they will carry you with them, and you will also support them. You will be propelling them to go further. So spiritual friendship is the entire path, to quote the Buddha.
And one small thing. So you also mentioned the term middle path. And so it's important to understand what the term middle path means in Buddhism. So middle path doesn't mean compromise or balance as it's commonly misused. Middle path means the Noble Eightfold Path. The Buddha is very clear on this. He says, Majjhima Patipata, so the middle path, the middle way, the middle practice, is the Noble Eightfold Path. So the Noble Eightfold Path, some people would say, is actually quite extreme. But that's fine, because it leads towards awakening. So middle path doesn't mean a compromise. Middle path means a commitment to following the Noble Eightfold Path. So the Buddha calls it the middle because it is neither self-indulgence nor self-torment. It's in the middle, which doesn't fall into either one of those two. But the Noble Eightfold Path, if you look at it, it's actually quite an engagement. It's quite an endeavor. So it's not about putting just a little bit of whiskey in your milk. It's about not putting any whiskey in your milk at all. Okay?
Thank you very much, Bhante. And perhaps you can also answer the next question from Melinda, who's saying, can you speak about the brain-mind relationship?
Yeah, so first off, just to be clear that in Buddhist terms, the mind is not the brain. The mind is an entirely non-physical phenomenon, whereas the brain is an entirely physical phenomenon. The brain is a physical part of the physical body, whereas the mind is a non-physical thing. So there's some connection between the body and the mind, of course. And there's some connection between the brain and the mind. To some degree, the brain is the connection between mind and body. The brain is the part of the body which the mind uses to interact with the rest of the body. So if the physical brain is damaged, that makes it very difficult for the mind to interact properly with the body. But the mind itself is not damaged. The brain may be damaged, but the mind is not damaged. It's kind of like if you normally wear glasses and your glasses get broken, then you have a hard time seeing. But it's not necessarily that there's anything wrong with your eyes, but rather there's something wrong with the glasses. In the same way, if the brain gets damaged, then the mind has a hard time interacting with the body. But the mind itself is not damaged. It's just the physical body, the physical brain that's damaged. Does that answer that question? Is that good enough, do you think?
I believe so, yes. Thank you very much. And Elaine is asking, would any of the Venerables consider Jesus to be a part of the Sangha? So we should all give a Zen answer to this question, or semi-Zen maybe. Maybe I'll start. So I tend to think as Jesus personally as a bodhisattva, so as a being in the process of full awakening. So it's actually quite interesting. When I read your question, I thought, technically, then that would make Jesus part of the Sangha, because I seem to understand that a bodhisattva is at least a stream enter, right?
Not really.
Oops. I was trying. All right, so let's pass it to, to Bhante Siddhazo.
It depends on how you define Sangha.
Wow, that was very zen answer, and also comment to my reply, Bhante Sumano.
Not really sure I know how to answer, actually. I think I'll just say that you can learn from anyone, whether they're the founder of a religion or not. And you can emulate people's wholesome qualities and not emulate people's unwholesome qualities. And then it doesn't really matter if they're part of the Sangha or not.
Great. Thank you. That was very useful. And hello to Adriana, and welcome to Art, that I believe from your last name you're in Thailand. So welcome, Art. And David is asking, I'm very new to the study of Buddhism and would like to know how Buddhism is able to exist in our current Western culture. My impression is that there are many outward forces that seem to be in a diametrically opposed view than the Buddhist view. Curious how all of you are able to reconcile this dynamic. Anyone wants to take this question?
Well, I can start anyway.
Okay, great.
Well, I think actually Ayasoma mentioned this maybe in your talk a couple of days ago about not romanticizing other cultures on one hand and not going in the opposite direction of denigrating one's own culture too much, so to speak. Because we can, when we encounter Buddhism or any foreign system of thought or philosophy or religion, it can be with this like, oh, those Easterners know it better and they know how to practice, they know, what makes people happy, whereas Westerners are just completely lost in like capitalism and destroying the environment. The reality is the whole world is involved in capitalism and destroying the environment. And that there's also people in the West who are very much interested in helping others and really understanding what this whole thing called life is about. So there are many forces, if you will, everywhere that are diametrically opposed to Buddhism. Even in what we come to know or call Buddhist countries, nowadays there's a lot of things that sort of are obstacles to the practice. But it's been that way since the start of Buddhism. Otherwise, we wouldn't even have the practice to begin with. If it was always, or rather, if it was in the beginning easy, then everybody would have just been enlightened. But the Buddha had to counter a lot of false beliefs, maybe even more than there are nowadays, you could say. A lot of things that people just didn't quite get, understand, or really believe in. So it's not so much that Westerners are backwards and have no interest in enlightenment solely, but rather there's just something about the mind that likes ignorance, that likes delusion, that likes greed and hatred. And that's universal. So there's nothing to reconcile, actually, when I look at it that way, because then you're just dealing with the human mind. And wherever you are in the world, it's going to be something you'll have to deal with. In some ways, it's the conditions here in the West are really good because a lot of people are realizing that all the systems and all the beliefs that we've held and considered to be the source of true happiness are crumbling right before our eyes. And that's causing a lot of people to really question what it is that they've sort of propped their world upon. And that can make actually people really interested in how others see the world, and in particular, how the Buddha saw the world. So yeah, it's actually pretty easy for me to practice Buddhism here in the West.
Would you like to add anything?
I think that's a pretty clear answer. I don't have anything to add.
Great.
Just emphasizing once again that Buddhism goes against the stream of the world. Buddhism goes against our natural tendencies of mind. So this is the way of the Dhamma. It's not unique to Western culture. It's miraculous that the Buddha Dhamma has survived at all, given that it's being passed through the hands of greed, hatred, and delusion all the time.
Thank you. I was going to say exactly the same, but yeah, we're all going against the stream. So wherever we are, it's same difference. And Art is saying, a wise man, recognizing that the world is but an illusion, does not act as if it is real, so he escapes the suffering. Is this a quote more than...
Yeah, that's not a question. That's
yes.
just... It's a nice quote.
It's a very nice quote. And Liz is asking, are there any suttas that reference consciousness mind during sleep?
In the Pali Suttas, the Buddha hardly ever talks about sleep or dreaming or states of mind during sleep. Hardly ever. He mostly talks about what to do while you're awake. And I think that's because while we're awake, we have the greatest clarity of mind and the greatest degree of self-control and the greatest opportunity, therefore, for cultivating the path to awakening. Whereas during sleep states and during dream states, the mind is usually too blurry and confused and dreamy to be much use in cultivating the path. That said, there are some techniques used especially in Vajrayana Buddhism, Tibetan Buddhism. There are some techniques used for practicing Buddhism even while sleeping, even while dreaming. But those were later developments. They're not found in the Pali Suttas anyway.
Thank you, Bhante. And Eleanor is asking, you most likely have felt lonely before. How did you let that go? How did you overcome this suffering? What did you understand that those who still suffer don't? So actually, personally, the last time I felt lonely was actually when I was a teenager. So that was way before I had practiced. I overcame, I guess, loneliness. And I didn't even think about it that way. Now I've overcome loneliness. But I guess I overcame loneliness before sort of having practical Buddhist teachings. Probably thanks to past karma, because I realized that there was so much suffering in my experience of dependence. So there were two ways through which I sort of started contemplating my state of being. One is that I started befriending actually dead people. And by that I mean Dostoevsky, Nietzsche, Thomas Mann, like all like sort of authors from the early 20th century. Those were my favorite authors, and they were all dead. But I felt like I would find these glimpses of what I now call Dharma in their books. And that would sort of clarify what I was going through. I was clarifying my sort of emotional experience. So those sort of became my friends. All my friends became dead. And also at the same time...
I'm going to take that out of context. All my friends became dead. Or, I make friends with dead people. These are great quotes.
And then at the same time, I was also looking for friends who were alive. And in my quest for happiness, I was jumping from sort of group of people to group of people. So I would, check out groups of people and go like, oh, those people look really happy and cool. I'm pretty sure if I would be their friend, I would also be cool and happy. So I would befriend them. And I was cool and happy. Maybe, I don't know if I was cool, but I was happy for like one day. And then I was like, actually, they're really not that great, or not that happy, or I don't know, I don't really fit in. And then I would look at another group and go, I'm pretty sure if I befriend these people and start hanging with them and like pursue those interests, now I'm going to be happy in that way. So I basically did that for about like 15 years or so, which in all different actually cities in Italy, in Europe, and then, well, eventually in the US, only one city in the US, New York City. But New York City is kind of like a million cities worldwide. So you can find different realms of experience very close by. And that created this passion, sort of realizing that actually happiness was not to be found in just hanging out with others, but rather in building solid, wholesome relationships built on wholesomeness. So now I have, now I have actually lots of spiritual friends, but I also have lots of great friends from my previous life within this life that even though I hardly see, they're like family, who are supportive, really care about everything that I do. In terms of not necessarily doing it with me, not necessarily sharing space with me, not even like necessarily talking about Buddhism or whatnot, but supporting me spiritually and physically, being appreciative of what I'm doing, perhaps coming to visit me, being curious about my life, and always being there for me when I need them. So in that way, I think that's also practicing Dharma. So whenever we practice the Dharma, we get closer to the cessation of suffering. So even though I didn't have the Buddhist teachings to fully guide me, I think maybe perhaps past karma, I was able to, in one shape or form, through a lot of trial and errors, I guess, find a glimpse of Dharma in that way. And then you're perfectly comfortable by yourself. Totally normal. It also helped that I was a freelancer for many years. Then I don't have any problem. When the pandemic started, actually, all the freelancers were kind of like, oh, okay, welcome to my life. All the writers, all the artists, they were like, yeah, that's cool. And the monks. So when you train yourself to be alone all the time, then whether you're surrounded by people or not, it's okay. And Ryan is saying, following up on Bhante Sudazo's comment about the brain being damaged, but the mind not being damaged, what about mental illness? I'm bipolar. Is that brain damage or mind damage?
Well, that's something that you need to look at yourself, actually. So, of course, we can have unwholesome thinking habits. In fact, we do, or else we would be enlightened by now. And those unwholesome thinking habits can cause us a great deal of torment and suffering and difficulty. But there can also be cases where there is something unusual about somebody's brain chemistry that then leads to pleasant physical experiences that influences how they think. So it's important to cultivate a clear awareness. What is going on in your mind? And what is going on in your body? As your practice becomes sharper and more refined, you may get to a point where you can recognize. Like, oh, I feel really manic right now. But that's just because my body chemistry is producing a sense, a physical feeling, which inspires mania. But I don't need to go along with that. I can keep my mind peaceful. Kind of like when you drink too much coffee or too much tea and your body is very like agitated. But if your mindfulness is good and you've been practicing samadhi for years, then you can just recognize like, oh, my body just feels really super keyed up and agitated right now. But my mind doesn't need to be agitated. My mind can be peaceful as it peacefully observes an agitated body. So you can do the same thing. You can recognize, my body chemistry is out of whack right now, but my mind doesn't need to go along with that. So you might notice as your body goes through manic depressive episodes, that it's just the body going through manic depressive episodes, but your mind doesn't need to be affected. Or vice versa, you might notice that you're falling into manic thinking patterns and recognize that it's optional. It's just a habit of thinking in that way, and you don't need to think in that way. Or you might notice yourself falling into depressive thought patterns. And again, recognizing that it doesn't need to be that way. You can always choose to do something else with your mind. So you might investigate for yourself and see what is the physical component of your condition and what is the mental component of your condition, and how can you work with those components in order to bring yourself more in line with the Dhamma. Okay?
Thank you, Bhante.
Oh, and also I should add to that, see a therapist if you're not already, because there are certain things which, if you don't have some general understanding of how to work with your condition, then practicing Dhamma might be a little too subtle, a little too advanced. So for people who have genuine mental disorders of one sort or another, it's usually advisable to start with ordinary secular psychotherapy. And once you've got things somewhat under control, then Buddhist practice will be much easier for you. It will be much more accessible.
All right, thank you, Bhante. And Art is asking, will he come back to Thailand? We surely hope so. Definitely after the worldwide pandemic. If
So
and when
maybe
there
in a
will
year
be.
or so.
Yeah. And Mark is saying, I read this story of a Kosa who was a Buddhist, maybe it's Ashoka.
Yeah.
Who was a Buddhist and a king who went to war to stop another group that was mindlessly killing others. Did the Buddha ever comment on the necessity of intervening at times?
Yeah, actually, there's a lovely story from the suttas of one king who was going to attack the Sakyans, which was the country the Buddha grew up in. And the Buddha intervened by sitting under a tree at the border between the two countries. And it was a tree that was half dead and had very few leaves. So it didn't have much shade. So the general, the army is coming to attack the Sakyan country. And they see this monk, the Buddha, sitting under this tree with very like sparse, spotty shade, not very comfortable. And they asked him, why are you sitting under this scraggly tree? Aren't you uncomfortable? And the Buddha replied, no, I'm very comfortable because I'm sitting in the land that I was born. I'm sitting in my own country. And this made the general stop. And so the Buddha then was able to, in a roundabout way, convince the other country not to attack the Sakyan kingdom. And he did this a second time, and they stopped a second time. And he did this a third time, and the third time they were like, well, we're just going to go ahead and attack the kingdom anyway. And at that point, the Buddha was like, well, I guess I did the best I could, and that was the end of that. So it's interesting here that the Buddha did intervene to try to stop the killing, but his intervention was entirely peaceful. He did not kill in order to stop killing. He did not go to war in order to stop war. That is futile. That is simply perpetuating misery. perpetuating suffering. So again, intervention to stop killing is a great thing to do. Just be careful that you're not doing more unwholesome things, because that's when you start to get into some very awkward karmic territory. You don't want to go there. It's very messy. That's what keeps the wheel of samsara spinning.
Thank you, Bante. And Elaine also has a follow-up for you, it seems. She defines Sangha as beings who are committed to the maintenance of the 5 precepts and who are committed to full awakening. Does Jesus fit in that description for you, Bhante Sudaso? And how does Theravada Buddhism define the Sangha? Thank you.
Well, in the Bible, it speaks about Jesus drinking wine. So he was clearly down on at least one of the 5 precepts. There's also some stories of him killing some spirits. So he's down to 3 out of 5. I'm not sure about the killing, lying, and sexual misconduct. I don't think there's anything in the Bible around those. Do you remember? I haven't read the Bible.
I don't think he lies. And I don't think
years.
sexual misconduct. I don't know.
Okay.
I haven't.
don't think he's. Did he steal?
No, he definitely didn't steal.
Okay, so he's keeping 3 out of 5. That's pretty good. Is he committed to full awakening? Well, the Bible doesn't really go into that, because that's not really what the Bible's about, is it? Again, I haven't read it in more than 20 years, so I don't remember so clearly. But I don't remember anything about enlightenment or awakening in the Bible. So your definition of the Sangha makes it seem pretty unlikely, to be perfectly honest. As for how it's defined in Theravada Buddhism, well, it's normally defined in 3 ways. So one way it's defined is to refer to the monastic Sangha, so the community of fully ordained monks of both genders. Another way it's defined is to refer to anyone who has attained at least the first stage of awakening. And another way the word Sangha is defined is to refer to all those who are sincerely committed to the Buddhist path. So whether they're monastics or lay people of any gender. Once again, Jesus doesn't quite seem to fit into any of these categories. This doesn't mean he wasn't a good person. And I mean, he still did some respectable things and he had some respectable qualities. But I think it's a stretch to say that he was part of the Sangha. Those are my thoughts anyway.
Thank you, Bante. I'm laughing because I read David's comment. They were always dead the whole time you were initially interacting with them. That's, I think, to me, befriending dead people. Eleanor says, and sometimes we feel even more lonely when we are with others. Exactly. Yes, there's actually 2 is the loneliest number, can be the loneliest number, even more than 1, because sometimes you're stuck to people that just for the sake of company, just for the sake of feeling good, that's, that's craving. That is so misleading. We think that the answer is in the object that we crave, but in reality, the problem is that we're craving to begin with. So then we get stuck with people that we can't tolerate, actually. And we couldn't tolerate them from second 1. And then we're surprised that we can't tolerate them after 1 week, 1 year, 10 years, 20 years. A lot of times I laugh about it. There's some people that come up to me, but this was way before I ordained even. And it was just, this person is so terrible. Like my husband's so awful. Like he doesn't really care about me. He never buys me flowers. He never gets me anything. I was like, he never did. Why are you surprised? Why were you thinking that things were going to change? So that's how we go about life. I realized a lot of time we seek these interactions and we craft the ideal interaction, the ideal relationship, the ideal friendship, the ideal, you name it, in our mind. And we can only sustain that delusion for a short period of time, because then at a certain point, reality kicks in and we can't deny it. It's right in front of us and we see it. So yeah, that's when we feel very lonely, but it's not the fault of the person that we are with. It's rather the fault of us following our cravings without fully analyzing them. And Liz is asking, will there be a female Buddha? And I'm going to pass this on to Bhante Sudazo again.
She likes to give me all the technical questions.
Also the hot topics.
So I'm going to give a somewhat controversial answer and say yes.
That's not controversial.
Oh, it's not? Oh.
I mean, not for me.
Yeah, so enlightenment has nothing to do with gender. Nothing at all. By definition, it can't have anything to do with gender. Enlightenment is transcending all the phenomena of the world. Enlightenment is the relinquishment of all sankharas. And gender is a sankhara. So that means that a person's gender cannot possibly have anything to do with their capacity to attain awakening. There's no possible way. Yeah. So there must have been female Buddhas in the past, and there most certainly will be female Buddhas in the future. Yeah.
Great. And Ryan is quoting plus posting. I just made this new word. Don't you love it when an ESL is doing the moderating?
This is how languages grow.
Yes.
In another 20 years, quoting will appear in the dictionary.
Yeah. So he's quoting from the Soma Sutta, where I get my name. So in the Bhikkhuni Samyutta. Anyone who says, I'm a woman, I'm a man, or I'm a man, or I'm a woman, or I'm anything at all is fit for Mara to address. Correct. Yes. What does gender got to do with it? What does race got to do with it? What does age got to do with it? Nothing. Literally nothing. So we're all in the same fishing bowl. Fish bowl.
The fishing bowl.
My English tonight is very creative. All right, and there's lots of support for Ryan. Yes, do not stop your meds. And
well, what I would say with that is that if you want to reduce or stop your meds, talk to your psychotherapists, your psychologists, your psychiatrists. Tell them that you want to reduce the meds, and ask them for advice on how to do so slowly and carefully under close supervision. Because you might reduce things 10% and they tell you, okay, this is not working, you need to go back on your full dose. Or you might reduce it 10% and they might be like, okay, actually this is working out, this is going okay. Let's try this out for a little while, and if everything's okay, we might try stepping it down a little bit more. But it's important to do it under their guidance, their supervision, and make sure that you listen to them. Make sure that they understand what's going on with you. Because it's very easy to slip into delusion states. And that's one of the primary dangers, actually, of mental illness, is that delusion states are so easy to slip into. So we can convince ourselves that everything's fine when it's not fine. So your doctors are the external witnesses who let you know when things are not fine and you need to start taking the pills again.
Great. And Elaine says about Jesus being part of the Sangha. Good point, Bhante. Wine? What? Who? Jesus killed someone?
You know the story better than I do. He killed some demons, as I recall. But in Buddhism, demons are still sentient beings with consciousness who need to be treated with respect just like everybody else.
All right. And Bhavani is sharing, our cat likes her names, Dharmika, Paramita, Nibbana, etc. She eats, sleeps, poops, and learns knowledge. Though she belongs to lower animal, she behaves like a Buddhist and likes chanting. Great.
Good. Yeah.
May she have a nice human rebirth or better rebirth anyway, so she can practice the Buddhist teachings. And Mary is saying, Venerables, can you offer Dharma for my husband's best friend, Mitchell, who lost his battle with cancer yesterday? We're experiencing a great loss and emptiness. I'm sorry to hear, Mary. Should we do a blessing chant, maybe?
Yeah. So did Mitchell pass away? Is that what happened?
I think so.
Yeah. Well, yeah, we can do some blessing chants.
Yeah, let's do it now.
Right now?
Yeah.
Okay. So wishing well for Mitchell, who's passed on, and for your husband, and for everyone who's affected by loss and difficulty related to this. May they all experience peace and happiness, and may they swiftly attain full awakening. So we'll do a bit of chanting. Iti piso bhagava araham samma sambuddho vijacharana sampanno sugato lokavidu anuttaro purisadhamma sarati satta deva manussanam buddho bhagavati svakato bhagavata dhammo Sanditiko akaliko ehipasiko opanayiko pachatam veditavo vinyuhiti supatipanno bhagavato savaka sangho ujupatipanno bhagavato savaka sangho nyayapatipanno bhagavato savaka sangho sami Patipanno bhagavato savaka sangho yaridam chattari purisa yugani atta purisa bhugala esa bhagavato savaka sangho ahuneyo Nakineyo Anjali Karaniyo Anuttaram Punya Ketam Lokasati Vavatu Sabha Mangalam Rakantu Sabha Devata Sabha Buddhanubhavena Sada Soti Bhavantu Te Bhavatu sabha mangalam rakantu sabha devata sabha dhammanubhavena sada soti bhavantu te Bhavatu sabha mangalam rakantu sabha devata sabha sanghanu bhavena sada soti Bhavantu te.
May Mitchell have a good rebirth, and may he find the Dhamma in his next life.
And it looks like that's the end of the questions. Mm-hmm. So if there's nothing else, maybe that's it for the evening.
All right. Well, perhaps we can give it a few seconds to see if anything else comes up, or if also if any one of our residents has any questions. Oh, Robin is asking, what is that you just chanted? Does it have a name?
Well, the first thing we chanted was the recollection of Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha. So a list of the qualities of Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha. Then after that, we chanted a wish for the people involved to be blessed by all the goodness of Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha, and to be protected by all the angels and good spirits of the world. It's basically what we chanted.
All right. Well, thank you so much, friends. Oh, actually, we just got a question from Bhavani. So I still thank you so much, friends. But Bhavani is asking, what is the Dhammapada all about?
You have to read it to find out.
That's a good answer. Well, and realistically, in order to understand the Dhammapada, you also have to read all the other suttas. Because the Dhammapada is kind of like a hyper-condensation of the entire Pali Canon into a handful of ultra-dense verses. So normally when people read the Dhammapada, if they're not familiar with the rest of the suttas, they don't really understand it. They get only a surface level understanding. Mm-hmm. So the Dhammapada is extremely deep, but at first glance, it doesn't actually look particularly profound. But after you read a bunch of other suttas, then you start to really appreciate how much dense, profound Dhamma is packed into a few words.
Wonderful. Thank you, Bante. And so I think this is all for this evening or morning if you're the other side of the world. Although this Sunday will actually be not on this channel, but on Samhita's channel. We'll write a little note, though, on our YouTube channel. We're co-hosting the second class of a series with Bante Sujato from Australia. So Bante Sujato is sharing a lot of different ways and hacks, as he calls them, to get about in this sort of apocalyptic state of existence that we are experiencing these days. So that will happen at 9 a.m. New York City time on Samhita's YouTube channel. We'll put a link, not tonight because we're tired, but tomorrow there will be an announcement with the link to click on our YouTube channel. So keep an eye out, and remember 9 a.m. New York City time. Do the math, and you can click here. And if you're already connected with our newsletter, then a few weeks ago you should have received the link to register. So then you can link into a video chat that is similar to Zoom, but it's not Zoom. But you can also talk to Bante Sujato live and he can see your face and all those good things that some people like to do. So remember, once again, 10 a.m. on Sunday, and then we'll resume our usual sutta study and evening Dhamma talk next week from Wednesday to Friday, 8 a.m. and 7:30 p.m. New York City time with more venerables. All right. So we can end with 3 sadhus. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Have a great evening.